just got into town about an hour ago.
Hey everybody, it's WB back in the video bunker, and tonight I'm working on a video that I have been wanting to put together for quite some time. I'm just now finding the time to get around to putting it together. But this evening I wanted to take a look at the Saiga rifles. I wanted to, first of all, for those of you who are firearms enthusiasts or are familiar with AK style rifles, you're probably very familiar with the Saiga. They're quite popular. They're actually used as a basis for some very high-end AK-47 conversions. So I wanted to take a brief look at the history of these rifles and then get into a little bit more detail and do a comparison of two Saiga conversions that I have, one in 7.62 by 39 and one in 223 caliber. So as far as the history of the Saiga rifles, they have somewhat of a pedigree. They're actually manufactured in the world-famous Izhmash factory in good old Mother Russia. This factory currently produces the Kalashnikov series of rifles along with a variety of other weapons for the Russian military and various police agencies. Now, a significant percentage of the rifles manufactured at the Izhmash factory in Russia are intended for export to other countries, a large percentage of those being exported to the United States. Now, to comply with the United States federal regulations, these rifles have to be imported into the United States in a sporter type configuration. And the difference being, actually there's a number of differences, but first of all, it won't have the pistol grip that most people are familiar with seeing on the AK-47. They will not accept the standard AK-47 magazines. They have a proprietary magazine. Again, they're configured in more of a hunting or sporter configuration. Now, they do make excellent conversions into AK-style rifles, but any type of conversion does need to be in compliance with 922R, which basically dictates the number of foreign-made parts that are allowed. In other words, if you change anything on the original sporter configuration, you have to watch very carefully the parts count. And I do have a link below to a website that'll help you with that information to give you a breakdown on what parts would need to be switched out if indeed you were to convert one of these rifles into a AK style rifle from a sporter configuration as they're imported into the United States. Now, the Saiga rifles are well known within the AK community. They actually make excellent conversions into AK style rifles. Arsenal is one U.S. concern that makes a very high quality, a series of very high quality AK rifles that are basically utilize the Saiga series of rifles as their platform, and of course they make the modifications in compliance with, again, the federal regulations that I mentioned a moment ago. Now, some of the features that I'd like to mention, and again I do have a side-by-side comparison of a couple of examples of converted Saiga rifles, and I will try to go through some of the pros and the cons as well. But I guess one of the things that I'll point out right off the bat is, again, these are very high quality AK style rifles. Again, they're imported in the sporter configuration, and because of that you can actually pick one up for a very reasonable price. I've actually seen some, we're in the later portion of 2013 right now, and I've actually seen some recently below $500. Now again, these are sporterized configurations. They're not really in the AK style when they're at that price typically. But for someone who lives in a state where there are restrictions on magazine capacities and they weren't really interested in converting it to a true AK style, that might be a strong consideration, because again, these are good quality, even in their sporter configuration, very good quality rifles. You may be limited on the magazine capacity, and you would have to probably run the proprietary magazines, which are fairly expensive. But again, nothing at all wrong with them as they're imported in the sporter configuration. They're still a very good good quality rifle for the price. Now, these rifles are imported in a variety of calibers. Most of the popular calibers that you can think of as far as semi-automatic carbines, you will find represented. Now, they do come in 20-inch barrels, and probably the more popular 16 inches and some change. The two that we're going to look at here are roughly 16 and a half inch barrels. And I do have a 20-inch barrel in 308 caliber that we'll take a look at as well. But some of the calibers that are available are 223, 7.62 by 39, 5.45 by 39, which is more or less your AK-74 caliber, 308, as I mentioned, and they also make some shotgun calibers as well, which are magazine fed as opposed to being tube fed. The two I'm most familiar with off the top of my head are 410 and 12 gauge. Based on the prices that I see them offered at, I do think the shotguns are somewhat desirable. They're fairly pricey, and it may be because they are magazine fed as opposed to feeding a single shell into the tube one at a time. Now, another reason that these rifles may be popular to convert into the true AK style rifles is that they are newly manufactured. In other words, these are currently manufactured again at the Izmash factory, whereas a lot of the other AK rifles that you'll come across are basically manufactured from leftover part sets, decommissioned military part sets from a variety of countries that again may have been sitting around for decades. Now it is possible to get quality AKs put together with matching part sets, so that's not necessarily a knock against them. But again, one of the appeals of this rifle is that it is newly manufactured. It's not been sitting around in a communist warehouse for decades before finding its way to the U.S. So that's a little bit of a foundation of information about the Saiga rifles. What I'd like to do now is do a more or less a side-by-side comparison of two Saiga conversions converted into the AK style rifles. Again, one in 7.62 by 39 and one in 223 caliber. So I'm going to switch my other camera, and as I like to do, I'll kind of start at the front of the gun and work my way towards the back. And what I'd like to do is maybe point out some of the similarities as well as some of the differences, some of the things that were done in the conversion process to get the rifles into the configuration that they currently are. So I'm going to switch cameras, and we'll catch you on the other end of the camera. All right, so here are the two Saigas that I'd like to take a look at this evening. As you can see, they've both been converted into more or less the AK style rifles with the pistol grips. The fire control groups move forward on them. On the left, we have the 7.62 by 39. You'll see the AK style magazines that it will run now. And on the right, we have 223 5.56 Saiga. And something I'll get into in a little bit, this one has had some additional parts installed that allows it to run standard AR-15 magazine. So as you see there, we have a USGI AR-15 magazine. Next to it, we have a Magpul, and inserted in the gun, we have a Tapco. So we'll get into the details on that. That's a really nice feature that I like about this gun, and I'll give you guys a little bit of information about that in case you're interested in doing something similar in your conversion, if you should be looking at converting one. Now in the background, we have a unconverted Saiga. This is a 308 with a 20-inch barrel, and I will go through, I'll actually do a side-by-side comparison with one of the other ones so you can see the difference. Now I will point out that all the handguards on these have been modified, and I'll get into that in just a second. But again, taking a look at these rifles, starting at the front and working our way back, I'd like to point out some of the differences and some of the similarities between the actual AKs as you may be more familiar with them. Starting with the front, you'll notice that these don't have any type of muzzle attachment on them. These barrels are imported without any kind of threading, so they don't have any kind of flash hiders or muzzle brakes, and that's something that would have to be added if you were interested in. And I may not have mentioned earlier, but the Saiga rifles do all have chrome line barrels, which is another quality feature. Now, as we're moving towards the back of the rifle, as I mentioned a moment ago, you will notice that the handguards and the gas tubes are not what you will find on a typical AK-47. Now, all of the handguards that you see here have been modified. When they come in their original form, they are one solid piece of plastic. If you can imagine, everywhere these are cut out is just solid plastic, and what I found very early on is they tend to trap the heat in between the barrel, which is on the bottom, and the gas tube, which is right above it, as you can see here. It's just, there's nothing to let that heat dissipate. So what I've done on all of my Saiga handguards is, on this one I cut the slots out on each side. This one as well, somewhat smaller slots. And on this one I kind of experimented with a combination of drilling some holes and cutting the slots as well. So again, nothing scientific there, just kind of trying to allow some airflow around the barrel to let some of the heat escape when they're being fired. So moving towards the rear, as I mentioned earlier, actually before I get to that, I will say that the sights are similar to what you will find on a typical AK as far as the iron sights. You do have the front posts and the rear adjustable sights on both the 7.62. Well, actually on all the ones that I'm familiar with. I'm not sure exactly if they have the exact same sights on the shotgun varieties, but I would imagine they do. One note here is that this is basically, as you're looking at the gas tube here, as we come to the front, that is basically where the gas pushes the piston back to cycle the next round. And one difference is that these are at a 90-degree angle, whereas many of the AK-47 varieties, they'll be at a 45-degree angle. My understanding is that the 90-degree angle is actually preferable and is less subject to a buildup of carbon. So I did mention earlier, and I wanted to go into a little bit more detail on that. The Saigas, as they're imported, do not run any type of anything other really than a proprietary magazine. They have the Ismash produced magazines as they come from the factory. I'm not sure if there's anything above 10 rounds on those. They may be limited to 10 rounds. And they do have some American-made manufacturers of those. ProMag is one manufacturer for both the 7.62 and the 223. They don't have a very good reputation as far as reliability. One that would probably be preferable to consider used to be called Surefire. I believe they're called SMG Tactical now, but I know that they make high capacity magazines for the 223 as well as the 7.62 and the 308. I know that they have I don't know if they're lifetime warranties, but I know that they do have long-term warranties on their magazines for the Saiga rifles, and you know, on the downside, they're not cheap, They have come down somewhat from what they were during hysteria buying times, but they're still not cheap. So in going a little bit further into that, if you do a conversion on a 7.62 by 39, you can do a conversion so that it will run the standard AK-47 magazines, which is what I've done on this one. Now, it does involve installing what's called a bullet guide. Not terribly expensive. I believe I got one for about $20 for everything needed to install on this one. I was hoping that it would still run the Saiga magazines, but it actually had to make a cut on the magazine latch to get it to function properly with the AK magazines, so it no longer will run the either the factory Saiga magazines or the other varieties of the Saiga magazines that are available more or less aftermarket. Now, something a little bit interesting on this one, and I'll get into more detail on it later. I know this is going to be a long video, and I do apologize, but as I'm zooming in here, this is actually an adapter that allows this 223 Saiga to run standard AR-15 magazines. Now, one of the benefits of this is that I still can run the Saiga magazines in it. So I have a more or less a stockpile of the original Saiga magazines that I bought, as well as the AR-15 magazines, which are somewhat cheaper. A few notes on that, and I'll demonstrate how it works towards the end of the video, but a few notes on that is, well, actually the piece was purchased from Texas AK Designs. I believe it was about $80, so it wasn't cheap, between $80 and $90, and there was some gunsmithing involved to install that and get it to work properly. So it's a question as to whether what I'm saving on the AR-15 magazines is enough to offset the expense of it, but I really like the flexibility of being able to run AR-15 magazines as well as the Saiga magazines in this gun. One further note on that is it does seem to like the thinner magazines. This Tapco magazine had to be shaved down considerably to get it to fit in there. It runs the USGI aluminum magazines just fine. The Magpul magazines are a perfect fit. It'll actually, this version of the Magpul magazine, which I'll detail in a moment, will drop right out. It's one of the few AR mags that'll actually drop free on this setup. So again, moving further back, we see the side rail for attaching optics. On the 223, I actually have a red dot on top of there, red-green dot. It's a quick detach, which I prefer. It does detach quickly. For example, if you had a dead battery in your red dot, you could just snatch that off of there and be back to your iron sights in a matter of less than 5 seconds. On the 7.62, I have a scope. The reasoning behind that is there's a lot less recoil on the 223, so a lot less of a beating that the red dot sight takes, whereas the scope is probably designed for a little bit heavier caliber and can probably take a little bit more of a beating without maybe coming off zero or really getting off center too much. So I got the quick detach on both of them, and the scope on the 7.62, red dot on the 223, and I think I've covered most everything. Basically, what I'd like to show you now, it's got a standard AK buttstock on both of these, which I actually like. It's very low profile, and you'll see in just a second it's probably about 2 inches shorter than the original the original Saiga buttstock. So let me lay my 7.62 out here next to the unconverted sporter configuration of the 308 and point out a couple of things here. So I tried to line them up basically at the end of the receiver on each of them. I don't know if it's a perfect line. Let me get a little bit closer here. But you'll notice that the buttstock is, as I mentioned, a couple inches longer on the unconverted Saiga. Again, the 20-inch barrel, so obviously that's longer to begin with. Not much you can do about that. If you'll notice, the trigger is all the way back towards the end of the receiver on the Sporter version, whereas on this one you'll see the pistol grip right at the end of the receiver, the one that's actually been converted. So that is basically the crux of your conversion process, is moving the fire control group forward, which gives you the room to install the pistol grip and moves the trigger group forward. The trigger seems to work very smoothly with the Tapco trigger fire control group, which is fairly common in these conversions. Now, one additional note, some of the later model Saigas have a bolt hold open feature. You'll see this little silver item right here in front of the trigger, and that will actually hold the bolt open. Now it won't hold the bolt open on the last round like an AR will, so it's not terribly functional, but I guess it's a nice thing to say that you have on there. I've seen them very commonly on 308 Saigas. I have not seen them on 762 or 223 or other variations, although my understanding is that some of the newer models, not necessarily limited to the 308, do have the bolt open capability. Right, so I've covered most of the major points that I wanted to share with you regarding the Saiga rifles. I did want to follow up on something that I mentioned earlier. Here I have the 223 Saiga that I mentioned earlier, and as you see, I currently have a Tapco AR-15 magazine in it. Now I wanted to show you this Texas AK designed adapter that allows this Saiga to run the standard AR-15 magazines. As I mentioned before, many of the magazines are very tight. Again, this Tapco magazine had to be shaved down significantly to get it to fit in there. But again, USGI magazines seem to fit very well. Magpul seems to be the perfect fit. It actually goes in there and will drop free. Actually, if I was holding it straight, it drops right out of there. So Magpul is a good bet for that. But I did want to show you the additional benefit of this approach. You can actually detach this adapter just like you would an AK magazine. In other words, you hit the magazine release, pull it forward, and the magazine and the entire adapter will come out. And here we have the actual Saiga magazines. This is a Surefire or SMG magazine that I mentioned earlier, 20 rounder. These are actually good quality polymer magazines. And as you see, these are still functional with the Saiga. Just snap them right in there like you normally would. If you want to go back to your adapter, you put it in, insert it just like you would a typical AK magazine, and it's in there and it's functioning. So appreciate you taking the time to watch this video. If you have any questions or comments, I'd love to hear them. Please post them up for me. Thanks again for watching, and we'll look forward to catching you on the next video.